My guest tonight is John Adams. He is the co-host of Hoax Busters Call. John, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing very well, Tim. How are you doing, sir?
Very, very good. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I enjoyed our last conversation, and I enjoy listening to your podcast. You are a very good conversationalist.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Now, of course, last time we talked about punk rock and music, how your research was inspired by Dave McGowan's research. We talked about the connections between punk rock and the intelligence community, and I guess its role in sort of social engineering or cultural programming. You've done a number of discussions regarding culture creation, social engineering, and the creation of the debt-financed consumerist culture. I think your series California Dreaming and also your talk on tiki culture stand out. You also have done a discussion regarding race dialectics or race relations. And I think all these issues blend because all this is an example of the elite manipulating a society using their financial power, which they leverage into political power, and also operating probably through secret societies or think tanks or, alphabet soup agencies that they can control to change the culture in dramatic ways over the years. Your talks cover this issue. Your California Dreaming series stands out because you talk about the development of the economy in Southern California, particularly aerospace, and how this was largely, it was fabricated, not through political processes. Wasn't an organic economic development or anything like that. How do you want to get into that? What's the best way?
Well, basically, when it came time to get into World War II, we have, for lack of a better word, a fake economy and fake prosperity. Now, before we get into this discussion, I want to preface this because a lot of times people hear us have a discussion, Chris and I, over at hoaxbusterscall.com, or maybe a discussion with you or someone else, and they think, we'll get some comments saying like, oh, you guys are socialist, communist, you guys hate America or something like that. That's not true. Okay? This is an objective look at something from the past, and it's a critique of something that was foundationally incorrect from the time it started. Okay? I was born here. I was raised here. There's nothing I can do about the culture that I was raised in. There's no way of going back and redoing it all over again. But you can go back and look at things objectively, and whether you like something about your culture or not, you need to at least examine it and see if that is manipulative. So the major prosperity that boom that happened after World War II was through government subsidies for the most part. And the government created jobs through the subsidizing largely of what we call the military-industrial complex, creating jobs out of thin air. And it created a mythical time period in American culture. It was a good life for a lot of people for a little bit, but it wasn't the American dream that was going to last because, as you and I know, it didn't last, and the aerospace industry did not last because it only served a purpose for a particular time period and it's meant to be discarded after that time period. Okay?
Yes. This was the roughly 1946, 47, let's say to 1971, that's when it started gradually deteriorating. This also coincides with the closing of the gold window by Nixon and the collapse of the Bretton Woods system. But the Bretton Woods system itself was a fake gold standard, and it was based on this, the enthronement of the U.S. dollar as a world reserve currency, which was enabled by the Second World War because during the war, all the gold had accumulated in the United States. But as you know, from that, the United States never intended to ever redeem those dollars for gold. And so it enabled the United States to sort of pursue a guns and butter policy. and some say the chickens came to roost in the 70s with the stagflation of the 70s. But it's an economy that's based largely on government, as you said, government subsidies, economic stimulus through debt-backed inflation, and it's not regenerative, nor is it sustainable.
Right, and I would say that when it comes to the economic side of it, I've looked into that in the past. I just tend to kind of look at what actually went down, and so by the time evident in culture, and so by the time the 70s roll around, like you said, you get the stagflation and whatnot. But what you also see is that this is the time period where they start negotiating with China. Nixon's going over talking to Mao. What are they discussing? Well, they're discussing the movement of large major corporations that by this time employ massive amounts of people in the U.S. and moving them over to China and creating the industrial base out of China. And then you, at the same time, of course, I'm sure you've read The Hard Road to World Order before from the Council on Foreign Relations, right around that same time, where they talk about the GATT treaty and whatnot. And so, yeah, you have all of this stuff kind of there to pull the rug out from underneath the economy that was needed during the Cold War. And I don't think the Cold War was a real Cold War. I don't believe that you may have a different opinion. I'm not too sure, but I don't believe that the Russians and the U.S. were really opposing each other when it came to the upper echelons. Obviously there were spies and espionage and that type of stuff, and my perspective is that was mostly looked at from a psychological operation perspective to see how people behave in certain situations. But I don't think that the Russians were ever a real threat to the U.S., and I don't think that the U.S. was ever a real threat to Russia. But what you got out of it was a massive expansion of the security state and this huge bubble created by aerospace that, by and large, you go look this up, we didn't even use over half the stuff that was made during that time period. And so it created a state of fear, a state of clamping down, and people allowing more government encroachment based off of this Cold War that existed, allegedly. And I'm sure that in Russia, they did the same thing to a certain extent.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the relations with China in the 1970s, because it appears that was a result of a long drawn-out plan by the power elite in the West, first to destabilize China in the early mid part of the century by importing communism, very similar thing they did with Russia. But by the 1970s, there's a plan to seek this reapproachment with China with Nixon and Kissinger, and also George Bush, by the way. And at this point, the decision is taken after Mao's death that China adopt a state capitalist model to slowly become sort of the factory to the world. But this coincides with economic policy that overvalues the dollar by exporting inflation abroad, because the dollar is the reserve currency. This weakens the U.S. export market, but it subsidizes imports. And this macroeconomic policy goes a long way in the hollowing out of the U.S. industrial base and transporting it to China. And these are, again, this isn't a natural economic process going on here because China's cheap labor or something. These are decisions that are being taken at the upper echelons, like the Federal Reserve or something, the central banks, Davos, the Bank for International Settlements, to create the macroeconomic conditions which destroy the industrial base of the country. So, sure,
you can go back to Bertrand Russell. Yeah. And I'm not saying Bertrand Russell because of what we were talking about earlier, but actually, just because you brought it up, yeah. The Bertrand Russell, Bertrand Russell, I think he went over to China in the 30s, and he was involved with what was called the Pugwash conferences. where it was like basically Fabian socialists who were in all areas of government, science, and technology, and academia all got together and discussed how they were going to, to put it in the words of the Fabians, how they were going to hammer the world into the shape that they wanted it to. So I think he went over to China. I don't know what year it was, but I believe it was in the 30s. And he was like kind of looking around, and he's like saying like, yeah, this is perfect. This is exactly what we want here, right?
Yeah.
And they mapped it out from that point on that China was going to be that way. And you see, there's one thing that people don't get, and once you explain it to them, it makes more sense if you look at it in this light. I mean, you couldn't, and I may have said this the last time I was on, but you couldn't ask for a better philosophy than, workers of the world unite for capitalists. Okay? Capitalists want workers. Okay, so if you have people who are used to an agricultural society where they're not involved in industry or production, but then you bring about an industrial revolution that from that point on supplants the agricultural society that existed prior to that, well, you want workers to have pride in your work and to be proud to be workers. So there's nothing better for mega capitalist industrialists than having people identify themselves as workers that you can give jobs to. And if you have some bumps along the road, well, you just organize those people into a union which you control and make them feel like they actually have a voice and a say in something. And then, so when the communization of China came about after Chiang Kai-shek, with Mao, who was supported by the West, who was supported by the OSS, they put him into power, and what it did is it molded a society of perfect workers that by the time the 1980s and 90s rolled around, you had people who were indoctrinated from generation to generation to be good little workers who would be great at putting all those microchips into those Apple computers. Mm-hmm. So yes, this was a social engineering project done by Britain, done by U.S. intelligence, and it was all set about by ultra elite people. It wasn't just something that, whoops-a-daisy, we accidentally lost control of old China over there, and they got into the hands of those wily old communists. No, that's not how it works. This was social engineering 101, engineering China for a particular time in the future. And you can even go back and read, for people who are new to this type of information, you could go back and read stuff written by guys, after World War I, talking about, an international community and whatnot. I know that's kind of old hat to you, Tim, or to some people who are listening to this, but yeah, international community, one world government, that type of stuff, one world economic system, that was all talked about prior to and during and after World War I. That's 1919.
Mm-hmm. And that's, one thing what we're seeing here is the old imperialism is more cultural than it is economic or military. And the best, or at least the first obstacle, the first goal is to have those who are colonized, those who are oppressed, internalize the commands of the oppressors. And by identifying as workers, proud workers, they have indeed internalized the commands of their oppressors.
Yeah, the other thing about that particular time period, from the 50s to the 70s, is that as much as the United States prided itself on being individualistic and non-communist, it actually became more socialist and more less individualistic than it had ever been prior to that. Mm-hmm. And one of those interesting ways was through suburbanization and what you call organizational culture. And it's interesting to see a reflection, even myself in the past, I must admit, that until looking into this a little bit more deeply years ago, you kind of look back on the 1950s, around that time period, as being some sort of traditional era. So anything after the 1950s is kind of, you think of that as, oh, that's the traditional, that's when people were, immersed in tradition. And, if you're maybe more of a liberal, you look at that as kind of a bad thing. If you're more of a conservative, you look at that as something that you want to get back to. But the 1950s was anything but traditional. It was very modern, very progressive, and it appealed both, universally, both to people who would consider themselves conservative or liberal. And the reason was the modernism and the, modernism and progress are synonymous for the most part. So on the left, you can appeal to somebody by saying, "Oh, it's progressive." You can appeal to somebody on more conservative with, "Oh, it's modern." And it was through this particular, upswing of newness that kind of catapulted America into what you'd call the consumerist culture. That's kind of what sociologists like Vance Packard talked about in the 1960s of the consumer culture, and organizational culture, which, like I said, like I was saying, was, as much as America thought themselves to be non-communist, non-socialist, by this time, public school systems are basically systemized, in every area of the country. There actually used to be areas of the country prior to World War II where they still didn't have public school systems. Okay, so there was a lot of things post World War II that came into being in American culture that did not exist prior to that. And there was a funny thing I was rolling around in my head when I was going over some information for this discussion that we were going to have, Tim. I want to ask you a question. Do you think that when people go to war, like, do more people come back from the war than who left, or do less people come back from the war?
That's interesting. It sounds like a trick question. Well, or you might immediately think, well, no, because some die. But I'd say, in many cases, more come back.
Well, no, it was a trick question, I must admit. Now, here's some figures I was looking at yesterday. So 16 million men fought in World War II. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's what they say. They also say that 291,000 died out of that 16 million. Okay, mm-hmm. Those are the official figures. So, if people left for war and then didn't come back, how do you get a housing shortage after the war?
Well, I think there was because of the housing stock that was depleted or deteriorated because all that capital, all that was resources spent during the war effort. But yeah,
okay. That's a possibility. I'm gonna take you one step further, and it'll be an aha moment, as they say. So it was because post World War II, you had a lot of displacement, because when men were coming back, they didn't go back to their hometowns. They started living in big cities.
Yeah, once they've seen Paris, how do they start to go back to the farm, right? As the song goes. Right?
Exactly. So one of the stops along the way, if you were coming in from the Pacific Theater, you had to stop in Hawaii, and then you had to go into the port of Los Angeles.
You're not going to go back to Idaho.
Absolutely. When you've got blonde bombshells walking around on the beach everywhere out here, why would you go back to Idaho?
Yeah.
Okay, so what happened with a lot of big cities from that point on was there was men who normally would have grown up in a small town, maybe took over the farm from the family, married a local hometown girl, and stayed within the area. It was even that way during and after World War I. Men still returned back home. The culture had changed, though, entirely. And so there was a lot of displacement, and a lot of people were concentrated in big cities. Well, yeah, when you've got that many people, I mean, we're talking 16 million men here, and there had been a big migration to California in particular because of the aerospace industry and the need for the building of the planes and the warships and all that type of stuff. So you had migration going on that wasn't unplanned and wasn't thought out. It actually was planned and was thought out. But when you get a concentration of people in that area, that's when you have a housing shortage. So even the housing shortage itself technically wasn't a real housing shortage. It was just people had been moved around and more highly concentrated into big cities, into the big beehives. Mm-hmm. So that's what they claim. The whatever books you go and look at, and I've read a bunch of them, whether it was Crabgrass Frontier or American Dreamscape, or the other big one is Building Suburbia. Those sociology books, they all say the same thing. Oh yeah, there was a post-war housing shortage. That's why suburbia had to be built, because there's too many people without houses. It's like, and so when you actually think about it, it's like, well, that doesn't sound correct. It's not logical to have guys go off to war and less men come back and have there be a housing shortage unless there was migration. And one thing that we discussed on our talk was the migration from Oklahoma.
From a depressed agriculture area, yeah. Right?
Yeah, and Chris, yeah, that's right. And Chris made a great point in earlier Hoax Busters calls where he talked about how they gave farmers 60 acres of land and a mule. That's how it used to be bantied about. An old saying, I got 60 acres of land and a mule. And the land was not enough land to be able to turn over the crops and, replenish the soil. That's how you got the Dust Bowl. Mm-hmm. So they were planting and planting on the same thing. Well, agriculture had been done for a very long time. I'm pretty sure that the government was quite aware of the fact that you couldn't do that with 60 acres of land. So the Dust Bowl was essentially, whether you want to say it was purposely done, which I say, and some people might say, no, it was not on purpose. It was just because they're dumb and they don't know what they're doing. Either way, the government caused it by plotting out Oklahoma 60 acres because that was not enough to turn over the soil, thus creating the Dust Bowl, thus creating the migration to California, which a lot of Oklahomans moved to California. And that's where you get the term aviation Okies. It's just so interesting and so serendipitous that this migration of all these poor people to California worked out perfectly for World War II to have these people work in these brand new factories. Because they all seem to move to the areas that they built all the factories in to build the planes. Mm-hmm. So it was, luckily for the government, that all worked out very well to have all those people there, because before the aerospace industry came to California, there was no aerospace industry. There wasn't even manufacturing here. It was an agricultural region. Okay, so you wouldn't really have had those people anyways to work in those factories. Once again, when all those people started moving out here and the aerospace industry came here, and then much more people from other areas of the country like Texas and Georgia and places like that started moving west, yes, they did need housing for those people, and it was particularly for people who lived in the South Bay area of Los Angeles and worked at the Douglas Aircraft and other facilities around Lockheed out in Burbank. And so those two areas right there, Lakewood, California, and then out near Burbank, you have what's now North Hollywood area, but Panorama City. Those two areas in particular became massive suburbs that were built. Lakewood in and of itself, by the time it was finished, was 17,000 homes, all built in one neighborhood. And all built because of the aerospace industry. So if you look into the aerospace industry, it is, defense contractors, airplane makers, all subsidized by tax money. Mm-hmm. Then you look at the homes that were built. Well, the developers were financed by the government as well to build those homes through FHA loans, and the homes were sold at a much more exorbitant price than they were built for, because these were cookie-cutter, streamlined houses, right? These were, what would you call it? McDonald's houses, basically, where this is the beginning of the McMansion. That's why they call it a McMansion, because it's a streamlined process, prefabricated. And that's not to say that prefabricated homes didn't exist in a prior time. They did. Prefab homes have existed since the late 1800s. In fact, some of the Victorian houses that you see are actually prefab.
Yeah, Sears Roebuck Company, I think.
Exactly.
Speaking of that, yeah. Now they're classic homes.
Right. Yeah. Now, there's nothing wrong with a prefab home, because it used to be that you yourself would order the prefab home and you'd build it, or you'd have somebody in a local area build it for you. And I've got a figure here that says before World War II, 1/3 of all homes were built by their owners or small contractors who built fewer than 5 houses a year and built another 1/3. Okay, so when the post-war when the wartime period and the post-war period came on, you had you had contractors who were financed by the government to build mass scale suburbs. Levittown in New York City, or outside of New York.
Yeah, Levitts, I think, weren't they CBs? They learned their skill of building runways in the South Pacific, and they applied their skill to the mass production of these tract homes. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Also, out where near your neck of the woods there, Fairfax was a big suburb built in an area that didn't have suburbs, and once again, as a result of the industry of government. So it's interesting that this book, Building Suburbia, particularly mentions Fairfax, Virginia, and it shows a picture of one of the major intersections there when it prior to it becoming a major suburb, and it's literally a little shack with a gas pump out in front of it, and then you see the picture of it today, and it's houses and malls and all sorts of wild stuff going on there. But yeah, that's what, and same thing with California, same thing with the area I grew up in. I talked about the particular area I grew up in on the call that we did, and that's how it is. You can go back and look at pictures just as early as the 1960s, and it was dirt roads. It was dirt roads and people living in houses that they built with their own hands. And literally by the time the 1970s and 80s came around, that all got developed into suburbs, suburban-style homes. Not really suburbs, because it's not. It's interesting. One of these books I was actually looking for a description, because Los Angeles has suburbs because it's the center. Los Angeles itself is the city, and then you have a suburb of the city, just like New York has suburbs of it. But Southern California in general is one massive suburb, but it doesn't really have a center city that it could call, home. And it's interesting that in this book, Crabgrass Frontier has a section on it called The Centerless City. and it actually talks about that, about how people, once suburbs take off, that you end up going to different cities for different reasons. You don't have like a home base, you know, kind of like out where you live. It's you know, you have to drive to different cities for different reasons, right? And out here in California, we still maintain the big consumer culture. And so sometimes you might have a Target in your hometown, but you like the Target in the next town over a little better. And that's the difference. That's the difference out here. That's what people drive to different towns for out here. Is I like that Best Buy better than the one that's in my hometown. It's the mega corporate box stores that you know, in different areas that are the difference, you know.
Yeah. And of course, the phenomenon of the I guess the corporate-owned mega store, whether it's the Best Buy or the Target, the Walmart, these things again aren't exactly a market phenomenon. This is all a product of various decisions that are taken at the macro level that encourage corporate centralization, concentration in the economy. That has destroyed the local flavor or color to areas. Everything's become homogenized on the corporate brand names. You drive across the country, and you run into every town seems to have these fabricated mega mall areas. They're all the same stores. You know, it's all Panera. It's all you know, it's Burger King, McDonald's, or you know, it's Best Buy, it's Target that you know, that inhabit these malls. There's a few local still left around. I believe in Cincinnati you still have something like Shillito's. There's Boscov's, which I've noticed in New Jersey and in the West Virginia area. But that seem to be, you know, smaller chain operations, localized, regional. But everything has seemed to become part of the, you know, it's global corp. You know.
Well, even the local things you'll find, unfortunately, I say this with, you know, unfortunately, I'm not making a critique of it, is unfortunately your local chains, for the most part, they carry the mega corporate global stuff.
Yeah.
As well. So it's like, you know, you know, every town around here, they've got an Ace Hardware, and it's a local, you know, it's Jim's Ace Hardware, but it's still an Ace Hardware, which is owned by a mega corporation. You know, so it's like your local hardware store where it used to be Jim's hardware store, and Jim got the tools made by somebody local. You don't do that anymore. It's probably the tools that are still made by the same people who make the stuff at Home Depot. So, and it really started with what was called the drive-in culture. And that's an interesting thing. We were actually talking about this with Hans Utter on the last call. I'm going to read a quote here. This is from the New York Times, May 16th, 1979, writer by the name of MacDonald Harris. He said, "The human animal has two profound and conflicting impulses. He wants to be safe and warm, snug, enclosed, and at home, and he wants to roam the wide world to see what is out there beyond the horizon. The automobile is a kind of house on wheels, but it will take you anywhere you want to go. You can conduct your sex life in it, you can eat and drink in it, go to the movies, listen to Vivaldi or the Rolling Stones, and you can dominate others if you have more power and are adept with a gear shift lever. It is a whole existence, or it is until the gas runs out."
Well, that's interesting. The car culture, or automobile culture, I think you made the point that it was actually driven by the aerospace industry.
Yes, at least in Southern California, and as we pointed out many times, Southern California is a test bed for the rest of the country and even the rest of the world at a certain level. Once you get into these, what's that?
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I just coughed.
Okay. So yeah, suburban culture. What you got out of the suburban culture was, like I said, you got a false prosperity. You got a lot of money generated from this industry that would have been non-existent except for the government loaning out the people money who they employed, the people who they employed tax money, loaning it out to developers and to defense contractors. And then the people who worked for those got this second-hand American dream. And so it was more money than anybody could have at any other time period who lived in certain areas of the country and worked in certain industries. And so along with the prosperity, we got the rise of automobile culture. Obviously, the automobile had existed for decades, but this was really the honing in of the automobile culture. And what you got was, as a result of this boom and bust fake economy, you got a lot of job displacement. Well, the job displacement in and of itself created the need for the automobile, especially in Southern California, because if you had a job, let's say you had a job and Douglas Aircraft downsized, you live over in Lakewood, and then they downsize and they lay you off, but you get a job over at Lockheed over in Burbank. Well, you're going to be driving 40 plus miles one way. Also, if the suburbs are built outside of a major city and all the jobs are concentrated in a major city, like if we move it off into New York, Levittown there, that's Westchester, New York. That's outside of the major city. You have to drive in, and when those particular suburbs started, there weren't trains going out there. Mm-hmm. Same thing where in Virginia, right? So you had all those highways built going in and out of these cities, and these were to places where they didn't have the means to be able to get that. Well, what's interesting is right around this time period, coincidentally enough, once again under the auspices of the Cold War, they came up with the U.S. highway system. And they said that the U.S. highway system was in case of martial law and, the commies, the Ruskies, coming to get us. So we needed to build these mega federal highways that connected every city all over the place because they had to be able to transport, Army and Marines and big missile carriers in and out of major cities in case of an attack. But I saw a great point in one of these books here saying that the overhead passes that were built for these highways weren't actually big enough to be able to fit missile carriers through.
Slide over.
And in the yeah, so you can just say and even one of these books here says, well, yeah, this leads me to believe that wasn't the intention at all. The intention was to build the highways for the purpose of this connecting the suburbs with the major cities. And of course, the areas that they built these highways in ran right through just happened to be all of the poor areas of town, so they had no problem kicking people out of their homes and displacing them to put in the highway system. And that is evident in downtown LA especially. I mean, all of the freeways run right through the worst parts of town. And even when they expand these freeways, that's the areas that they always seem to expand it. They don't go to Beverly Hills or in the 405 area where Sunset Boulevard runs. They don't go up there and tell people they're going to do eminent domain on them. I'm telling you that much.
Yeah. Same thing in New York City, if you want to understand. Yeah. When they built the highways through there.
And on that note, I wanted to read something. I thought you would think this was interesting, but you know who the author Jane Jacobs was?
Not offhand.
Okay, so she wrote 2 books. I'm sure she wrote some other ones, but 2 interesting ones. One was called The Death and Life of the Great American Cities, and the other one was called The Economy of Cities. But got this little interesting thing in here. Where is it? So it's talking about how the Mellon family runs Pittsburgh. Okay, that's what she's talking about here. The Mellon family runs. During World War II, the rulers of Pittsburgh, the Mellons, took stock of the city and its long gathering troubles and decided that the city was not attractive enough to hold its young people or to attract new industries. In the 20 years since, one measure after another has been tried, much as if the economic problems of Pittsburgh were the problems of a young lady with insufficient grooming, manners, and breeding and popularity. Richard K. Mellon, current chief of the family that has dominated Pittsburgh throughout its decline, and for a few years before the decline began, has caused to be employed and to minister to Pittsburgh thousands of economic consultants, industrial analysts, regional planners, city planners, highway planners, parking planners, cultural planners, educational planners, planning coordinators, urban designers, housers, social engineers, civic organizers, sociologists, statisticians, political scientists, home economists, citizen liaison experts, municipal service experts, retail trade experts, anti-pollution experts, publicity experts, development experts, redevelopment experts, dispensers of birth control pills to the poor, and of course experts at attracting industry. They have industriously documented, studied, analyzed, psychoanalyzed, measured, manipulated, cleaned, facelifted, rebuilt, cajoled, extorted, and publicized Pittsburgh. But nobody has done anything effective about generating new exports from Pittsburgh's local economy. Capital that might have been available for young enterprises has been devoted to manipulating the people of Pittsburgh and to immensely expensive urban renewal and highway programs that have not helped the economy one bit. Okay? And this was a book written in the year 1969. And Miss Jacobs is known for being right on in her analysis of the way cities get run and built. And interestingly enough, that sounds kind of like a conservative or libertarian type stuff, and Miss Jacobs always said she was a liberal. So even a liberal can recognize some of those things sometimes, that's for sure.
That would seem to go with some of the research I came across with the destruction of cities in the post-war era, the destruction of the ethnic neighborhoods to create this diaspora into suburbia. Of course, this coincides with your mention, the interstate highway system, which of course benefited petrochemical industries, automobile industry. I think it's no coincidence the person who oversaw the construction of the interstate highway system was Charles Wilson, who was the head of General Motors. And I think the it was DuPont company was the guy who had the transportation department, the head of DuPont. DuPont did. So it was both General Motors and DuPont who oversaw the construction of these, these transformative, huge projects that were, that had social engineering, ideas behind them, really. But urban renewal was a big scam because what they would do is they called neighborhood dilapidated or neglected, and it was just kind of an old neighborhood that had low income, substandard housing, but it was perfectly adequate for the people that lived there. They could afford it. They weren't in debt. But they would hire journalists to go out and kick over trash cans, take a picture of it, and put that on a newspaper. Say, look at this dilapidated neighborhood. You had people messing up neighborhoods, taking pictures of it, and then putting it on the newspaper saying this area is dilapidated, it's neglected, and that would create the political support, at least the pretext for implementing an urban renewal program. So a lot of malfeasance and deceit in these things.
Of course, and I just want to say one thing: Bertrand Russell is an SOB.
I agree with you there. Let's take a break. So you got this urban renewal scam going. Of course, at the same time, they're pushing integration, which sounds nice, but it turns out there was an ulterior motive to that because this also was in a plan concocted to break up these ethnic urban neighborhoods, which are largely Catholic. And this was done for political reasons because I guess you could say the WASP elite didn't like the the growing influence of the Catholic Church in the United States. And this is largely based on demographics, part largely the baby boom, which is largely a Catholic thing in the mid 20th century. And so the idea was to bust up these neighborhoods, get people into suburbia, and they stop being Italian Catholic or German Catholic or Polish Catholic, and just become sort of this denatured white middle class, deracinated. And that's where you can get this consumerist culture fueled with debt, by the way, with funny money. And that's when the psychological warfare kicks in. You get Madison Avenue and Hollywood doing their thing, transforming society. All this, again, none of this is done for altruistic purposes or for progressive. These are the excuses. The idea really is to fundamentally change the culture, because at the time, right after going into World War II, right after World War II, the war planners, the power elite, wanted an American century, wanted the empire, and the sort of the decentralized, ethnic-based communities of pre-war America weren't going to go along with it. Of course, that was best expressed in the America First Committee, which was subsequently slandered and marginalized, so they could have their war.
Right. There's a lot of, that whole history. I see the perspective you're coming from with it, and I think that is correct. I agree with that to a degree. And I agree with the part that they wanted to, get rid of religious-based, ethnic-type communities and homogenize them. And I'm not saying that you're saying that was the sole target, but it was a process of what you see. People didn't identify overtly racially back in a previous time period. There were people who obviously didn't like people of other races, and you had conflicts and things like that. No debating that. But as far as the way that people identify by race today, it was a little bit different, and it was a little bit less. How do I put it? It wasn't as defined as it is today, because people stayed within their particular groups. Whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing is neither here nor there. Mm-hmm. It has to do with, that's the way it was back then, okay? And people didn't necessarily think it was a bad thing. People think, when segregation happened, that, every black person was overjoyed to be coming and going to school with white people. That wasn't the case, okay? In fact, what it did, for the most part, was you had these black communities, and they existed quite well, and they educated their children quite well, and they had their own businesses, and they had a class structure the same way that white people have a class structure amongst them. And whatever about class structure, that's just the way that this culture and system works. There's class structures within economic systems. That's how it is. And so once you were able to get rid of the racially or ethnic-based communities, whatever you want to call them, you were able to bring in mega corporations. Mm. So now, Joe's furniture store. Well, you can't have Joe's furniture store anymore. In fact, we're going to put Joe out of business, and Joe is going to work at the Walmart.
Yep.
Okay. Bill's clothiers that have been there since the 1800s. Yeah, Bill's not going to work there. Now he's going to work at JCPenney. Okay, so that's what it did. That was one of the reasons. Like you were saying, you're absolutely correct. It was a corporate effort to displace businesses that existed and businesses that were community specific. It wasn't even racially specific either. It was just community based. And now you have a homogenized world of people of all races. I mean, yeah, it's great. It's wonderful. It's everybody's equal because everybody is equally shopping at Walmart together.
Mm-hmm. And through this top-down corporate, sort of this top-down corporate structure, you can implement all types of social engineering schemes, not even directly through the government, but through your human resources department. Or you can have PayPal threatening to boycott North Carolina because it passed a law that's saying that men and women should use separate bathrooms based on their biological sex, right?
Yeah, there was another thing that was happening too back then. I mean, there's a book written by some conservative John Birch Society type women. What was it? Please pass the. It's called "Pass the Poverty, Please." You look that old book up, and there's these two ladies from Pasadena, California, in the '60s when they implemented civil rights, and they go through the scam that was civil rights because. What happened is the government dished out money to cities all over the country to equalize the school system, to integrate the school system. And with any sort of government subsidy or money that is given out, there is an excess of money. There's more money than you can even possibly be able to do anything with. And so these ladies documented a whole litany of, of excessive spending and, drinking and partying with the money that was supposed to be for the civil rights movement and all sorts of stuff. And actually the employment of radical groups to create problems is another interesting component of that, is where you don't have a problem, well, you need a problem, so you get a group to create a problem, and then out of that problem, you get more money.
This is how you stir up white flight, too. So
sure.
Make life livable in these neighborhoods. That was the Blackstone Rangers, I think, got like $900,000 from the Health, Education, and Welfare. Sergeant Shriver wrote the check.
Sergeant Shriver, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, Kennedy.
Yep.
Kennedy's coming into the picture again. Always elitists running these things. It's amazing. They care so much for the poor. So yeah, you have these programs that are not helping the poor.
These were the community development grants, correct? What you're talking about?
Community, yeah, that's exactly it. And so what happened is more wasted tax money and that all that type of stuff. And the taxes that you pay are real. You do pay real taxes, and the money does get put to no use whatsoever. I'm driving through potholes as we speak. I thought the money was to pay for the roads. So these government programs that came about in the 60s, the integration, all that type of stuff, especially like these ladies were pointing out in Pasadena, that these poor kids had to be bused. I mean, Pasadena is in the North Hills area of Los Angeles. It's not that great of a drive from South Central all the way into Pasadena. It's kind of a far drive. But they were busing kids in to go to school in Pasadena from South Central because instead of maybe, like let's just say you were going to do something nice with the money, whatever. We know that doesn't happen, but let's just say, okay, what we're going to do, we're going to implement some better teaching programs. We're going to build some nicer schools, and we're going to make it just as nice as the area that the white people live in down here in South Central. But they didn't do that. What they did is they took a whole busloads of black children and bused them into the white area. Now, why would you do that except to create conflict? Mm-hmm. You see, but it was done under the auspices of, the white children get better education, which we know that's not true. Nobody gets better education. Everybody has crappy education across the board. But the white children, they got better education, so we need to bring the black kids out of the ghetto and put them into the white kids' school. Well, all it did was create more racial division and more racial conflict, integrating people, like you said, that that's currently happening in Europe. And it's not like people aren't aware of this. It's not like they're not. It's not like they're not aware of that. There's going to be conflict out of that. There's no way that you can technically do this and have good things come out of it. Now, people might say, well, hey, look at society today, John and Tim. Black people and white people get along just fine. Mexicans and Asians get along great, and all that type of stuff. And that's a result of civil rights and the government helping out. Actually, it's not. In actuality, people prior to, quote unquote, the civil rights movement, people were already starting to do that naturally anyways. And it may have taken a little longer, but there would have been less conflict in the process of doing it. And the conflict, as we delve into this history, you actually find out that most of the conflict is manufactured conflict on top of it.
And we're assumed a pattern, maybe not consistent with the planner's plans, but that's not the point. The point is people should not be moved around like shuffled around like concrete. They should be able to live where they want to live. But again, with housing, it became very clear that it was government policy. This was done through the foundations, the Ford Foundation, and the U.S. government was that it was. I think it was. What's his name? The guy who wrote An American Dilemma, or theoretically wrote American Dilemma. It's probably ghostwritten. Myrdal. He said that it was, and this as early as 1940 when he supposedly wrote the book. He said that no longer would Americans be allowed to choose where they want to live. Things have to be planned. So that's the presumption these social engineers take with people's lives, spending other people's money, telling where to live. But the worst part is it's social engineering, and social engineering always involves malfeasance and deception, because you can't just come out and say it. This is what you're doing. But the whole idea behind racial integration was not integration. I think the whole notion was this sort of strategy of tension to reorganize society in a way that was amenable to. Yeah, this was sort of a strategy of tension that we've seen played out in varying degrees throughout the throughout the Cold War. But again, the goal was actually greater racial divide as actually you see the results of it. It was as you created white suburbia and urban neighborhoods, or black neighborhoods. The whole idea, this was done when they moved up the sharecroppers from the south into the cities into the war plants and didn't provide adequate housing. They dumped them in the middle of these Polish neighborhoods to create. The goal was to create problems. So again, we shouldn't assume that the power elite have our best interest at heart when they're playing games with our lives.
Never. No. What usually, when they talk about urban renewal, okay, and urban planning and all that type of stuff. Now, that's a little bit different than suburban planning, okay, because urban planning and urban renewal is mostly city-based. And it's interesting. One of the biggest catastrophes in urban renewal were the structures that were built outside of St. Louis. And interestingly enough, those urban planning developments were built by the guy who built the Twin Towers. But I don't know if you're aware of that story of the mass, just the absolute, what was the word I'm looking for? Failure of urban renewal and urban planning, when these buildings that were built and they were, lauded to be the next best thing in making, helping the poor and helping people. What they did is they demolished a whole neighborhood outside of St. Louis, demolished and displaced all the people, and then they built these Soviet-looking, brutalist architecture structures and stacked them and packed them all into this area, all into these huge, this urban development buildings. They're like 60 stories tall or something like that, where they pack all these people in, and it just turned into it basically turned into a ghetto inside a building.
Yeah, this is the Bauhaus construction or something.
No, it was it was like one of those buildings that you see like in Berlin or something.
Yeah, or Good Times, right? The TV show Good Times.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, they have structures like that outside of New York too, like in the Bronx area where they built these urban renewal developments, and they're terrible. They're absolutely terrible, and so that's mainly what you get. And I don't think that there's when it comes to the particular system that we live in, that you're not going to find a good way to solve a problem like that, whether it be through when it has to do with the state organizing how people are going to live. The current system that we live in requires poverty. It requires people to be poor. It requires people to be super rich. That's how the system is set up. So as a result of that, you're going to have people who are poor, and I don't have the answers as to how to alleviate those problems, but certainly it's not by giving more money to the state to take care of the problem itself. And it's just failure after failure after failure when it comes to these particular programs. I mean, there's programs right now in the city that I live in, and there are homeless people and prostitutes all up and down the streets. So those same problems still exist that existed in ancient times. And when it comes to integrating people, that's another ancient tactic. In fact, if you go read Gallic Wars by Caesar, it actually talks about moving people from another area into another area, because those people would, when he was talking about the domination of the Gauls, he goes into how you could take people out of one area and turn them into Romans, right? So they'd conquer people, and then they'd say, okay, well, you guys are Romans now. And then they'd displace those people, move them into another area, and those people would actually successfully dominate the people that they were trying to get in the new area that they were going into. Mm-hmm. And so, this is an old trick of migration and whatnot and that type of stuff. So, once again, it's done today. Everything has to be nice and soft sounding. So when you say something like civil rights, once again, from my perspective, what it was is in the black community, you didn't have everybody paying taxes yet, and you didn't have all the black people in the system that the white people were pretty much dominated by in the U.S. Anybody who you could call white, technically you could call. They didn't call Italians white until the 1960s. They didn't call, Poles and Czechs and all those type of Eastern Europeans and those people. They didn't call those people white back before the 1960s. Once all of those groups themselves became integrated into the system that, quote unquote, Americans were already integrated into, that's when you started seeing all of these little subgroups who identified themselves as something other than just, white America. They had to be incorporated into the system that was already dominated. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't civil rights. It wasn't because we care about you, we love you, we want you to have equal rights. No, it was because you needed to be incorporated into the tax-based economy as well.
Yes. Yeah. And there's also this idea of using them as sort of a lumpen proletariat to destabilize, to create that strategy of tension that I talked about earlier. The Jewish influence in the civil rights movement dates back to the to the Leo Frank trial in the South, where organized Jewish community went after the South for trying a Jewish guy down in Georgia for raping a young girl, Mary Fagan, and they convicted him. And that's when all the Jewish-controlled press in the North went after the South, and the South sort of recoiled and defensively started, saying, "Hey, we're not anti-Semitic. We're not some backwater tyranny. This guy got a fair trial, and he was convicted." Then they got the governor of the state was more or less bribed to commute the sentence. Then the guy was then, he was then lynched. Right out front of Mary Fagan's house, by the way, where the little girl that he was convicted of raping and killing, and this started this animus towards against the South by the organized Jewish community, and this is what got them involved in the civil rights movement and started the NAACP, and using them sort of as a proxy force to destabilize, exploiting real differences, real problems. That's the key. The differences have to exist. These grievances have to be real. But the idea is that integration, civil rights, equality, all these ideas can be weaponized to destabilize and to achieve an objective that the malefactors aren't really trying to achieve. And so, I mean, it's one of these things where, again, you have to look past the textbook treatment of these events and really get into the sub rosa reality of these events. It's much more complex and far more devious than we're told.
Right. And I would say to anybody who's listening to this as well, don't let the fact that the given history is fraudulent make you fall into a group like a white nationalist group or something like that, because that stuff's just as easily controlled as well.
Yes.
And what you see happening now, when you see a lot of people like getting upset and angry as they become displaced, currently, wherever it may be or whatever, there's the tendency to go back into this like racial identification of, now I'm going to be a white guy standing up for my white rights. But see, that's already well thought out in advance as well, and they've got people waiting for you to fall back into those groups, just like they had civil rights groups waiting for black people to join in the 60s.
Yes, so like the Black Panthers, which was
yes,
was set up largely by David Horse, a Jewish operation. Again, it's the Black Jewish Alliance, which broke up in the 60s, and that's when they started producing black exploitation films, which was a CIA project, by the way, and working with MGM.
Oh, of course.
Gordon Parks was Time Life. He's the one who directed it, and he was an agent for the CIA, and he infiltrated the Black Panthers and started producing these films to degrade the culture and to produce the pimp culture. When the black radicals, when they backed off promoting black radicalism, they started promoting sexual degradation to further weaken the family. At the same time, you have Gloria Steinem with Ms. Magazine producing, it was that article, the myth, Black Macho Myth or something, to denigrate black masculinity. So it's a
sure. On that same note, you said Time Life. I've got a Look magazine, which Look is Look is life. I've got a Look magazine from '69, and it's the Black Power issue of Look magazine. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to guess Look magazine was not something that was directed towards black people.
I think they're targeted as another audience, don't you think?
Yeah, just saying. I mean, you could look at most of the old issues of Look magazine. You could tell who their target audience was. It was the people living in the suburbs. And so to have a Black Power issue of Look magazine is pretty funny. I was laughing at it as I was looking at it. It's like it was so contrived. It was so soulless. It was, they have a Jimi Hendrix interview. They've got, a Sidney Poitier interview. And Yeah, it's pretty funny, but yes, you are correct. The blaxploitation cinema, man, I've probably seen a good portion of all those blaxploitation films, and that was the one thing that I could never get over. As funny as some of those are, they are pretty funny, with some terrible acting in it. Mm-hmm. That was one thing that struck me. I'm in no way, shape, or form a person who dislikes Jewish people, but I can never get over. I would always look at the names on it, and I was like, this is written by a Jewish guy. I thought this was all supposed to be about blacks. Like it was supposed to be movies about blacks, for blacks, by blacks, but yet they've got the Jewish writers. That's weird. And then, like you said, it's mostly all of the movies. I don't even know if there is a blaxploitation film except for maybe Blackula that doesn't incorporate the pimp. The pimp thing, or like anytime you see one of the like the Pam Grier movies, yeah. she's always got to bed the bad guy to get what she wants. So it always revolves around degraded sexual culture and degraded drug culture as well. And, of course, unfortunately, that's the culture that you see proliferate throughout the black community after that time period, and become even into the modern day with the rapper. Mm-hmm. That's what it still has to do. It's the black male stereotype of the guy who handles his business by smoking pot all day and slapping women around.
There is a mythical. I don't know if it's true or not. There's a report of a meeting in the early '90s between record labels and owners, I guess people who have concerns in the prison industrial complex, to promote rap music, to promote criminal behavior, to swell the prison population, to create a slave labor pool that can then be sold, which we're now seeing unfolding in the privatized prison system. I don't know if that's apocryphal or not. I don't know, but that type of long-term planning or business modeling is not to me, it's not something that's unbelievable. It's something that an MBA or someone would plan out over the long term to create
I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah,
I don't know that happened, but I wouldn't doubt it. The other thing that doesn't get factored in a lot of the times to that particular angle, and I think it's a very important part that needs to become part of the discussion when people discuss this, is the consumer culture is on the back end of all of that. Yeah. The mass consumer and the incorporation of the black people into the consumerist culture. Black people didn't have a consumer culture. Okay? They didn't have a culture based around material possessions, like a lot of people who live in the suburbs and who are white and in the organizational society, the organizational culture in America. Once black people got incorporated in the 1960s, in the 1970s, into that material possession culture, that's when you see a lot of the focus, and by the time the 1980s comes around with rap music becoming very dominant, and of course with the incorporation of black actors into movies and things like this, the black person becomes very essential to the consumerist culture in general, not just to blacks, but also to whites, to whoever. They become an icon of material culture, of material possession. So it was an essential part to be able to incorporate that. And also, whereas we talked about before, how with the artificial prosperity that was, largely given to white America in the 1950s through the aerospace culture, with the pimp culture, with the drug culture, that was the selling point to the black community to excess and material wealth. As people were being incorporated into the system, as they were allowing black people to work at places, now they've integrated the workplace, they've integrated the school system, and people are starting to make more money. Well, you still have created the street hustler culture.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's the street hustler going to spend all his newfound money on? Well, he's going to spend it on stuff, just like the white guy has. And that's what you always see in those blaxploitation movies. It's always the black man wants to be like the big, rich white man. He wants to get the Cadillac. He wants to have the gold rings, right? And it's always funny to me that anytime you have these movies, that the white guy, he's so stereotyped. The big rich white man, he's always stereotyped in the same fashion. And Chris and I have discussed this too, that like, back when J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller were around, like, it was part of their role to act rich. Like, J.P. Morgan would ride around with white horses in a carriage, and John D. Rockefeller would walk around giving dimes to people, and they wore the big stovepipe hats and things like this. And this was part of the persona of acting like a rich person, right?
Yeah.
But yet, I know you've seen footage of David Rockefeller and Lord Rothschild and all those people, Tim. You don't even see those guys wear jewelry.
That's right.
Okay. They don't even wear jewelry. They drive around in inconspicuous cars. They wear plain black suits. They don't want to be known. They don't want anybody to recognize them. Okay? That's what a real rich guy does. So you have this stereotype of these actors from previous century who'd ride around the white horse, wear the $5,000 suit, act like big money. But the real rich guys behind the scenes, they don't want to be known. And so we have this stereotype, and then the black rapper stereotype given to the black man is to try to copy the stereotype that was given to white people already.
Yeah. But it is, I mean, that's a good point. Yeah, they're playing a role, and now the people who really, I guess you could say the real movers and shakers, the powers that be, they want to remain as inconspicuous as possible because they want to be able to go about doing their business without too much attention.
Absolutely.
They're not going to
absolutely. I don't even think it's part of that culture. I think those people are raised in a fashion to where they know better not to blow their money on things like that. Or I saw a BBC documentary on the Rothschilds, and it's part of Jacob Rothschild's job to stimulate the art movement, right? Mm-hmm. To be part of the arts and to purchase, $1 million art pieces and put them in a house and create a big cultural art center for rich people and all this type of stuff. And I think what it is because everybody knows that if Lord Rothschild purchases something, like let's say Lord Rothschild purchases your painting, Tim, then like 100 other people are going to purchase your paintings too. Because you become cool because Lord Rothschild bought your painting. Well, they stimulate the art scene and these particular little areas of society to create a scam. Because what they do is they create foundations for the arts. People donate to these foundations. You see how that scam works?
Yeah.
And there's a whole documentary about this. I would definitely recommend people go watch this hilarious documentary where Jacob Rothschild is spending the entire, they make it funny. They make it kind of tongue-in-cheek funny, where he's spending the whole documentary asking someone to can you just move it a little over to the left, please? I just want just a hair to the left. And they make him appear as if he's super anal, everything has to be perfect down to the T, and that's part of a role that they play of being rich. And it creates a standard that that people are used to, that when you're dealing with these people, these are who you're dealing with. You're not dealing with a guy who's wearing, a gold ring on every finger and 50 gold chains. This guy is not classy. That's not a classy rich person. The Kardashians are not classy rich people.
But the general public is supposed to emulate the Kardashians or the rapper with bling, because the goal there is to create sort of a degraded consumerism, or a degraded culture through consumerism, crass consumerism.
Right. Yeah. Let me read one thing here real quick. This is from a book written by Vance Packard. I think you wrote this. Now, I don't agree with everything Vance Packard says, but he definitely had some interesting books like The Hidden Persuaders and The Status Seekers and The Waste Makers. And this book is written in 1960. It's called The Waste Makers. It tells the startling facts behind American philosophy and practices of deliberate waste. Okay? It's on page 53. It says, the engineering journals uneasily mulled the pros and cons of planned obsolescence through material failure. In April 1956, Electrical Manufacturing ran a think piece called Design for Planned Obsolescence. It said that the lifetime guarantee, once a potent sales appeal, was losing its charm as restless Americans faced with the need of an expanding economy were in a mood to accept planned obsolescence. The hard logic of our national economy, it said, would support the need for a broad policy of planned obsolescence in order to take the maximum advantage of our potential productivity and technological progress. Okay? Here's another thing. Pierre Martinel, research and marketing director of the Chicago Tribune, observed much the same wariness of old in his motivation in advertising. He reported, tradition bores us. Instead of being an asset, it is virtually a liability to a people looking for the newest and the newest. Always the newest. A survey made by a magazine for the mechanically inclined revealed that the typical American changed his or her car mainly for the sake of change. He wants a new one. General Motors in 1960 began running double-spread advertisements glorifying the general idea of new car buying. It proclaimed, there's nothing like a new car to enrich your family life. Hedonism was also actively promoted by campaigns to persuade the American people that they deserve to enjoy the pleasures of an enriched living instantly without lifting a finger. Instant and ready became the magic words in the marketing, everything from soda pop, whipped cream, cherry pies, and headache remedies. The noted business philosopher Charles G. Mortimer, chairman of the board of General Foods, lectured businessmen that one of the great challenges of the day was promoting creative convenience. He pointed to the tidal wave of craving for convenience, sweeping the country, and stated, today convenience is the success factor of just about every type of product and service that is showing steady growth. Just about everything we buy today must be ready to use, ready to wear, ready to plug in, ready to turn on, or ready to take home.
Well, that's kind of funny because if you're talking to someone about how you develop character, how do you mature? It's through overcoming adversity, right? That's how we grow. And you have to have a certain amount of challenge and discomfort in life to develop properly. And the escape from the retreat from that necessary suffering, I think there's a quote by that said all mental illness derives from the avoidance of necessary suffering. I think that's a quote. Someone, I forget who said that, but that's it kind of the idea that is that growth comes from hard work and sacrifice, i.e., saving, so you build capital. But you don't waste your seed, your seed, right, for the next season, like a farmer. You waste your.
I think doesn't Les Miserables have a quote that says something akin to prosperity makes monsters, adversity makes men?
Yeah, that's a great quote. And this type of, I think in your article, you read a couple articles last spring about how sort of the convenience trap. You all have a weakness for convenience and ease. It's the disutility of labor, I guess. So that the planners, the advertisers, the culture creators know how to get us, and they're getting a lot of people with convenience.
Yeah, it's such a very strange subject to touch, because you have to ask yourself, at what point do you stop things from being convenient? And how do you apply logic to that particular situation? Because most people would say, like, if you can make something more convenient, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Right?
But
and to a certain extent, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, good example. A good example is sort of whether it's architecture or art. I mean, art. The reason why we admire art is because somehow it's difficult to curate. Right? I mean, so you can't apply that across the board. But I'm saying there's a cultural effect, or at least an effect on people's morals, if things become too easy.
I agree, and I'm one of those folks who say I don't necessarily take things the convenient way for the most part. I think that there's a certain amount of acclimation to something that you become akin to. You might be able to pick and choose what should be convenient and what shouldn't be convenient. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's going to be things that will never be convenient. Like I always get somebody who wants to learn, guitar from me.
Yeah.
And the only thing I can ever say, and this was a funny thing that my guitar teacher told me, because there were so many things that I wanted to do. Like, my mind was already more advanced than my fingers.
Yeah.
And so I would always, ask my guitar teacher, like, how can I learn faster? How can I do this? I would show him something on a record that I wanted to do. I want to do this. He would say, the only thing you can do is wait. He says, it's just going to come with time. He's all, I don't have an answer for you. He's all, it just comes with time. One day it's going to click. One day you're going to get it. And so there's even things that convenience can't even force into the world. A lot of it has to do less with the physical world and more with the mind.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing with art, like you just said. Art is only going to come from a creative mind. It cannot be manufactured. You could technically say that people, as time goes on, you can apply creativity to more technical processes, i.e., like somebody can do something creative with digital photography or something like that.
Yeah.
Which that in of itself is a convenience, and someone might even say aesthetically that digital photography is not as cool as photography with film, and I would agree. But like I said, that's a very hard thing to say what is more convenient and at what point does it demoralize what it is that you're trying to do. Right, and that's what we have. It's like someone could say, "What's wrong with fast food?" What's wrong with fast food? Fast food is good. It's like, well, fast food is good for the system that we exist in, and the system that has been allowed to exist and come into fruition around us. But that doesn't necessarily mean fast food is good.
And the whole system is geared towards processed fast food because as families require two incomes to keep the roof over their heads, the wife is no longer there to prepare the food at home, to take care of domestic concerns while the man earns the money. So all of a sudden they find themselves being forced to consume processed food or fast food. This in turn creates long-term health effects, which then sets them up to be harvested by the medical industrial complex.
Oh yeah, that's right. I mean, who's gonna make the food when Dad's at the strip joint and Mom's looking for Mr. Goodbar?
Yeah, and dual incomes promotes that because obviously, it's the occasion of sin, right? The more if you're out of the house, and that creates more family instability, the pursuit of the career, just sheer opportunity, also just alienation from each other as jobs, and also the lack of respect that the man gets because he can no longer provide for the family, and of course that's promoted as equality and feminism, and
which is that's how you absolutely 100% know that is a weaponized form of culture, and you literally have to convince women today that childbirth is good.
You're insulting their very nature. Their fertility is now considered a disease. It's been pathologized.
Yeah. Right, by women themselves. So a good majority of them, it's like.
Well, it goes back to internalizing the commands of your oppressors. That's what feminism did. Look, this is equality. Go out and work. Slave for a boss. Get ulcers. Get sick.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, be more. Yeah, be more like the man, the organization man, the culturally devoid man, the man who reads Playboy. Of course, through Playboy, he's being told that everything that he's doing is culture. That is culture.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And Playboy was it's sophisticated. It's laced with all sorts of stuff. It's actually what it was doing was they call Vance Packer calls it the feminization of the male. But see, that's even a loaded term because that's implying that the woman herself was naturally materialistic, which that's not true.
Yeah.
The woman of this system, of this non-traditional system, is materialistic, and through Playboy into the 1960s, they made the man more materialistic. The man, now he uses hair products. He wears pink ties. He wears nylon stockings. And
he's concerned about body hair.
Yeah, he starts shaving his chest, and all sorts of weird, strange things. And then in turn, the woman is then told that this is the type of man you got to be attracted to. You're no longer going to be. You don't get attracted to that dirty old guy working out in a field somewhere, breaking a sweat, and he's wearing the dirty overalls. That guy is old news, and masculinity is, masculinity, revolves around, what type of cufflinks a man has.
Yep.
So it's a very it's all blossomed into a very strange thing, and it all has to do with non-traditional culture. And I'd say the majority of this talk here, just to bring this to a close before I go, is that you can't harken back to an era of non-tradition and think that it's tradition. So you can't say, I wish we could go back to the suburbs and, mom, the wife in the kitchen, the man going to work. Because one that didn't really totally all the way across the board exist, that is a idealized type of thing. And two, the problems that arose out of suburbia and the quote unquote traditional American culture, which was not traditional, were the result of that organizational culture coming into being.
Yes, yeah.
I asked this question on those talks that we did. It's a rhetorical, but I'll ask it here. If you have a portion of the country that is based off of agriculture and based off of rural living, like here in Southern California, who decides that all of a sudden that needs to go out the window to build homes everywhere and shopping malls? Like what happened to all of that agriculture? You see what I'm saying? It's like it literally happened overnight in the big scope of things. Somebody had to have just said, well, yeah, we're not going to need that agriculture anymore. We're just going to build homes here. So you're telling me that overnight, the agriculture base of Southern California just dried up. Nobody needed that. Nobody needed those fruits and vegetables anymore.
Well, because they wanted to ship them in from overseas, and that way you sell more petroleum.
Well, I'll tell you what happens here in good old California is California oranges are actually Florida oranges.
Yep. It makes no sense, does it?
They ship us Florida oranges over here, and I always marvel at that. I never buy an orange from the store. I always buy it from a farmer's market if I do, or I have an orange tree myself. But yeah, you go into the market and they've got Florida oranges in there in California.
Yeah. Well, I think what is it? They can externalize their direct cost on other people, and for the individual companies, it is profitable. But they're able to externalize their costs, just like how you can pollute a river and not get charged for it. You're just simply externalizing your costs on everybody else.
Hey, all I know is one of Graham Parsons' siblings somewhere is making a whole lot of money.
That's right. That's right. But yeah, it's But again, go back to what you said. We can harken back to a golden era that never was, and that era was set up. Was fabricated by the social engineers and planners. One thing you notice is the nuclear family, it came at the expense of the extended family and the ethnic neighborhood. And even if the mother did have to work part-time, which many of them did, most of them did at some level, they often worked at home, or if they did work, the children were being watched by an aunt or an uncle, or lived in a community where everyone was close-knit and they all had the same values. So those communities were smashed because they weren't convenient to the war planners, and yeah, it's hard to distinguish what level of society is organic, what's being manipulated. I think it's obviously people are reacting to conditions, to circumstances, to culture. Like you said, you were born into a culture, and there's nothing you can do about that. But we can stand back and try to take a few steps back and take a look at it and try to analyze it. You mentioned white identity or white nationalism as a reaction to some of this, racial. I think problems that are being created by George Soros and company, those groups, and what they have to understand is that the concept of whiteness is fabricated. There is no whiteness.
Absolutely.
There's Pole.
Absolutely. I mean, someone would call me a white person. I'm sure I'm a mutt.
Yeah.
I've got German, Irish, English. I mean, there were times in the past where Germans and English would never interbreed.
Yeah.
But I'm a white person. Whatever that means, I don't even know. I was never raised to have a racial identity, and I think most people aren't, for the most part. But they get told through mass media that that's how you identify yourself, and that leads to division and problems and looking at people because of their differences. It's mainly through mass media that comes about, and it's an unfortunate thing. As far as the nuclear family was a total social engineering design. It was mainly promoted through Life magazine. Life magazine was one of the main promoters of. There's actually a whole book written on that, and it was actually written by a lesbian feminist. I think her name's Wendy Kozel, but she actually did write a good book about that, how the nuclear family was actually like pretty much the product of Time Life magazine.
And who ran that?
Yeah, that was Mr. Henry Luce, Skull and Bone, CIA, OSS.
And it's the whole Time Life empire. It's Life, I think Fortune, Sports Illustrated. And so this sort of, through these publications, they kind of created for Americans what it meant to be an American, whether it's
absolutely
girls in bikinis, sports, being rich, being middle class with life, and that kind of formed the idea of the good life in America. Consumerism.
Yeah.
Oh, and Time.
That's right.
Time. Of course, Life, Fortune, especially in Time magazine.
That's what Life is all about, right there.
And if you deviate from Life magazine or Fortune or Sports Illustrated or Time, you're just a savage. So that was it. And it's interesting.
I agree.
that Sports Illustrated is now once again putting Bruce Jenner on the cover. 40
Right.
years later. 40 years later, the anniversary of the
Yeah.
athlon, right?
Yeah, it's yeah, that in and of itself is a
Another
2-hour discussion, I'm sure. So,
so you listen.
but,
Yeah, you got to go now.
Mr. Kelly, I do, and I appreciate you having me on, and I really enjoyed the discussion. And yeah, if you want to have me back soon, I'd love to come back.
Yeah, there's plenty more to talk about. It's just the question of coordinating the schedule. I will definitely try to coordinate something again, and we'll continue the discussion or whatever else comes up. And yeah, I just want to thank you for being so generous with your time, and I'll let you go. Enjoy the rest of your evening. So.
Great, you too. I just want to plug hoaxbusterscall.com. That's Chris Kendall's website, and him and I do the afternoon commute on a weekly basis. You can check that out.
And I heartily endorse that show. It's a great, it's a great discussion you all have there. So it's hoaxbusterscall.com, Chris Kendall. It's where you can get hear most of your shows, right?
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great.
Cool.
And occasionally you write an essay or two. So good read. So.
Yeah. I'll have one of those out again pretty soon here. So.
Great. Well.
So yeah. Thank you very much, sir.
Take it easy. Good night.
All right. Good night.